Three shots cracked through the stale air of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Glass exploded as the mirror behind the bar shattered. A whiskey bottle burst, spraying amber liquid across the room. One man lay sprawled across a poker table, blood pooling beneath him. Ethan Blackwood stood in the center of the saloon, a custom Colt Army Model 1860 still smoking in his hand. Unlike the standard .44 caliber, Ethan's had been modified with a hair trigger and custom-tooled grips, a gunsmith masterpiece. The room fell silent except for the dripping whiskey and a dying man's ragged breath. Ethan's weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's and cold as Montana steel, never left the two remaining gunmen. His stance was balanced, weight slightly forward, ready to fire again with deadly precision. "I don't want any more blood spilled today," he said, his voice low and measured like distant thunder. "But if either of you makes another move toward the woman, I'll put you both in the ground before your next heartbeat." Bill Clayton, the taller of the two men, his face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the wooden floor. His hand hovered near his holster. "You just killed my best man, Blackwood," Clayton growled. "This ain't over. Not by a damn sight." "It is for now," Ethan replied, thumb resting lightly on the hammer of his Colt. The room held its breath. Men pressed against walls, bartenders ducked below counters. Nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire between Ethan Blackwood and the Clayton brothers. Behind Ethan, a young woman stood pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Pride, perhaps, or a newfound respect. She clutched a small Derringer pistol in her trembling hand. But this wasn't how their story began. No, it started 2 months earlier, when the worst drought in 20 years had begun to strangle Rattlesnake Valley. Montana Territory, 1875. The sun hung mercilessly in a cloudless sky, baking the earth and turning the once green valley into a wasteland of brown. Rattlesnake Creek, normally flush with clear mountain water, had shrunk to a pitiful trickle. Ethan Blackwood surveyed his land from atop his chestnut stallion, Red. At 45, the lines on his face told stories of hardship and loss that his lips rarely spoke. His ranch, 500 head of cattle, 15 hired hands, and the finest breeding stock this side of the Mississippi, represented 15 years of sweat and blood. 10 years a widower, Ethan had built his empire alone. The locals respected him, feared him perhaps, but few knew the man behind the legend. They whispered about his past as a Union Army sharpshooter during the Civil War. They said he could hit a man's eye at 500 yards, and that he had many times at Antietam and Gettysburg. Ethan dismounted by the creek, kneeling to check the water level. It had dropped another inch since yesterday. At this rate, by August, there'd be nothing left. He scooped a handful of muddy water and let it trickle through his fingers. "Water rights will be worth more than gold soon," said Hank, his foreman, riding up behind him. Ethan nodded grimly. "The Clayton brothers have been eyeing my reservoir. Caught their men scouting the North Ridge yesterday. Want me to post men up there? Double the guards and check our ammunition stores. Bill Clayton doesn't negotiate, he takes." In town that evening, the Silver Dollar Saloon hummed with subdued conversation. The drought had everyone on edge. Cattle ranchers muttered about water rights while farmers prayed for rain. Ethan sat in the corner nursing a whiskey, observing rather than participating. He'd never been one for idle chatter. At the center table, Frank Mitchell was deep in a poker game, sweat beading on his brow. Once a moderately successful farmer, Frank had watched his crops wither and die over the past 3 seasons. Now he drowned his sorrows in cheap whiskey and even cheaper gambling. "I'm good for it, McManus," Frank slurred, eyeing his cards. "Just need one more round." The dealer shook his head. "You're already into me for $50. That's enough." "Blackwood," Frank called out suddenly, turning bloodshot eyes toward Ethan's corner. You'll stake me, won't you? I still owe you for that loan last spring. Might as well make it an even hundred. Ethan didn't respond, just took another sip of his whiskey. Frank lurched to his feet, desperation making him bold. I got something worth trading, something even you might want. The saloon quieted as Frank staggered to the doors and threw them open. Sarah, get in here, girl. A young woman stepped reluctantly into the saloon. She was perhaps 24, with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her dress was worn but clean, her posture rigid with dignity despite the circumstances. Her eyes, a striking blue that reminded Ethan of mountain lakes, scanned the room before settling on her father with undisguised contempt. This here's my daughter, Frank announced, grabbing her roughly by the arm. Sarah, strong as any farmhand and prettier than most. She'd make a fine wife for a man who needs one. The room fell silent. Even in Rattlesnake Valley, this crossed a line. She's like a good mare, Blackwood, Frank continued, oblivious to the disgust on the faces around him. She'll birth you strong sons. Sarah's face burned with humiliation, but she stood tall, chin lifted in defiance. Her right hand moved slowly toward her pocket. Ethan set his glass down with a sharp tap. That's enough, Mitchell. You're drunk. $100, Blackwood. She's worth 10 times that. Hell, those Clayton brothers been making offers for months. At the mention of the Clayton brothers, Ethan's attention sharpened. Bill and Ray Clayton were the territory's most notorious outlaws, rustlers, kidnappers, and worse. The thought of Sarah in their hands. As if summoned by their name, the saloon doors swung open again, and the Clayton brothers sauntered in. Bill, the older one, smiled when he saw Sarah, the smile of a wolf spotting a wounded deer. Well now, looks like auction days come early, he drawled, approaching Frank. How much for the filly, Mitchell? I'm feeling generous today. 200 in my new Remington. Ethan stood up, the legs of his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The room grew quiet, men shifting away from the center. The lady isn't for sale, Ethan said, his voice carrying across the room. Bill Clayton's hand drifted toward his pistol. This ain't your business, Blackwood. I'm making it my business. Ethan's voice was calm, but everyone in the room recognized the threat behind it. Frank owes me money. I'll take the debt in exchange for escorting Miss Mitchell safely home. She ain't going home, Frank spat. Debt's got to be paid. Ethan nodded slowly, calculation in his eyes. Then she'll come work at my ranch. Room and board plus fair wages until your debt is settled. That's my offer. Frank? Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of hope crossing her face. Deal, Frank said quickly, before the Clayton brothers could intervene. He shoved Sarah toward Ethan. She's your problem now. Bill Clayton stepped forward, hand now resting on his holster. Now wait just a minute. We were in the middle of a negotiation here. Like I said, Bill, Ethan replied, moving his coat back to reveal his own holster. This isn't your concern. For a tense moment, it seemed the Clayton brothers might push the issue. But something in Ethan's eyes, the cold certainty of a man who killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do so again, made them reconsider. This ain't over, Blackwood, Ray Clayton muttered as they backed toward the door. We'll be seeing you real soon. I'll be waiting, Ethan replied. When they'd gone, he turned to Sarah. Miss Mitchell, get your things. We're leaving. Her blue eyes met his, fire and ice all at once. I am not yours to command, Mr. Blackwood. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, you're not. But I reckon you'd rather leave with me than stay here. The choice is yours. She held his gaze for a long moment, then slipped her hand into her pocket, withdrawing it empty. Ethan noticed but said nothing. I'll get my bag, she said finally, her voice steady despite everything. The ride to Blackwood Ranch was silent except for the rhythmic thud of hooves against hard-packed earth. Sarah rode her own horse, a bay mare Ethan had brought for her back straight as a ramrod. The moon cast long shadows across the trail as they crested the final hill, and the ranch came into view. Even in moonlight, Blackwood Ranch was impressive. A large main house of timber and stone, bunk houses for the hands, a barn bigger than most in the territory, and corrals filled with horses. Unlike the parched valley below, a ribbon of green followed the diverted creek through Ethan's property. As they approached, a ranch hand emerged from the shadows, Winchester repeating rifle at the ready. "Just me, Hank," Ethan called. The man lowered his weapon. "Welcome back, boss." His eyes drifted curiously to Sarah. "This is Miss Mitchell. She'll be staying with us for a while. See that her horse is taken care of." Ethan dismounted and offered Sarah his hand. She ignored it, climbing down on her own. "This way," he said, leading her toward the main house. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over a surprisingly comfortable living area. Bookshelves lined one wall, not what Sarah had expected from a cattleman. She noticed volumes of Whitman, Thoreau, and even Shakespeare alongside practical books on animal husbandry and gunsmithing. "You'll have your own room," Ethan said, gesturing to a staircase. "Second door on the left. There's a lock on the inside. Use it if it makes you feel safer." Sarah eyed him suspiciously. "What exactly do you expect from me, Mr. Blackwood?" "Nothing you're not willing to give," he replied evenly. "You can help with cooking and household chores if you have a mind to. Or you can help with the horses. I hear you're good with them. Or you can sit in your room and read books all day. Makes no difference to me. And when will my father's debt be paid?" "By my calculation, 6 months should settle it, with fair wages counted against what he owes." "And then I'm free to go?" Ethan's gaze was steady. "Miss Mitchell, you're free to go whenever you please. I'm not your jailer, but those Clayton brothers are still out there, and they're not known for taking no for an answer. At least here, you're safe." Sarah lifted her chin. "I won't share your bed. I never asked you to." Something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps offense. Perhaps amusement. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Good night, Miss Mitchell." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah alone in the unfamiliar house. 3 days passed. Sarah kept to herself, emerging only for meals, which she ate alone in the kitchen. She explored the house when Ethan was out, running her fingers along the spines of his books, surprised by the breadth of his collection and the worn pages that showed frequent reading. On the 4th morning, she was in the stable, visiting her mare, when she heard gunshots in the distance. Startled, she stepped outside to see Ethan and 2 ranch hands racing toward the northern fence line. Curiosity got the better of her, and she saddled her horse, following at a safe distance. When she crested a hill, she saw Ethan and his men taking cover behind boulders, exchanging fire with riders on the opposite ridge. Even from a distance, she recognized the Clayton brothers. She watched as Ethan took careful aim with his Winchester .73, a weapon renowned for its accuracy. He steadied his breathing just as he had at Gettysburg, sighting down the barrel. The rifle cracked, and 200 yards away, a man toppled from his saddle. "Damn fine shot, boss," one of the hands muttered. 1,264, Ethan said quietly, working the lever action to chamber another round. "Sir?" "Nothing." He fired again, and another rider clutched his shoulder and wheeled his horse around. The others retreated, dragging their wounded with them. When Ethan returned to the house that evening, his arm was wrapped in a bloodied bandage. "You're hurt," Sarah said, surprising herself with her own concern. "It's nothing. Bullet grazed me." "Let me see." The words came out before she could stop them. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. He sat at the kitchen table while she unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The wound wasn't deep, but it needed cleaning. As she worked, she noticed other scars on his arm and shoulder. Old wounds, long healed. One particularly jagged scar ran from his shoulder halfway down his bicep. "Antietam," he said, noticing her gaze. "Confederate cavalry saber." She said nothing, just continued cleaning his fresh wound. "The Clayton brothers?" she asked, nodding toward it. "Yes, they were cutting my fence line, trying to steal cattle most likely. Or perhaps they were looking for me." Ethan's eyes met hers. "Perhaps. Either way, they won't get what they came for." She finished bandaging his arm in silence, acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. "Thank you," he said when she was done. "I should thank you," she replied stiffly, "for what you did at the saloon, even if your motives were less than pure." A faint smile touched his lips. "Miss Mitchell, I've been called many things in my life, but pure has never been one of them." He stood up. "I need to check the North Ridge. We lost 2 good horses today." He started toward the door, then paused. "Do you know how to shoot?" Sarah hesitated. "My father taught me a little, before the drinking got bad." Ethan nodded. "Tomorrow morning, if you're willing, I'd like to teach you more. A woman should know how to defend herself out here." With that, he was gone, leaving Sarah to wonder at the strange flutter in her chest. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Ethan met Sarah behind the barn, where he'd set up targets, bottles on fence posts at varying distances. He carried a wooden case which he set on a barrel before opening. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a Remington Derringer pistol and a Smith & Wesson Model 3 revolver. "The Derringer was my wife's," he explained, lifting the small pistol carefully. "Small enough to carry in a pocket or reticule, but it'll stop a man if you hit him right." He handed it to her. "The Smith & Wesson has more stopping power, but it's heavier to carry." Sarah took the Derringer, surprised by its weight despite its size. "2 shots," Ethan explained. "Make them count." He positioned her in front of the closest target, a bottle 20 feet away. "Wider stance," he instructed, standing close behind her. "Both hands on the grip until you're comfortable with the recoil." Sarah tried to focus on the target, but she was distantly aware of his presence, the scent of leather and horses, the rumble of his voice. "Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze." She fired. The bottle remained intact. "Again," he said calmly. "Focus on the front sight, not the target." She fired again. This time the bottle shattered. "Good," Ethan said, genuine approval in his voice. "Now let's try the revolver." By noon, Sarah had graduated to the Winchester, though the recoil nearly knocked her over the first time she fired it. To her surprise, Ethan laughed, a rich, warm sound she hadn't heard before. "My first time with a rifle. I landed flat on my backside," he admitted, helping her up. "You're doing better than I did." As they walked back to the house, she felt oddly accomplished. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Teaching me to shoot, giving me a room with a lock, letting me read your books. What do you want from me?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. "Not everyone wants something, Miss Mitchell." "In my experience, Mr. Blackwood, everyone wants something." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "What I want," he said carefully, "is to sleep at night knowing I've done right by you. That's all." Before she could respond, one of the ranch hands rode up, waving urgently. "Boss, smoke on the North Ridge. Looks like they're burning the line shack." Ethan's expression hardened. "Get the men, and bring rifles." He turned to Sarah. "Stay in the house, lock the doors, and keep that Derringer close." Then he was gone, running toward the stables. Sarah watched him go, the Derringer heavy in her pocket. The attack came just before dusk. Sarah was in the kitchen when she heard shouting and gunfire. She ran to the window to see 5 riders charging toward the house. The Clayton brothers had returned with reinforcements while Ethan and most of the men were dealing with the fire at the line shack. Only old Hank and a young ranch hand named Tom remained to defend the main house. They took positions on the porch, rifles ready. "Get down, Miss Mitchell," Hank shouted as the first volley of bullets splintered the porch railing. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed the Derringer from her pocket. 2 shots, she thought frantically. Not enough. Then she remembered Ethan's gun cabinet in the study. She ran to it, using a hairpin to pick the lock just as her father had taught her years ago. Inside, she found a loaded Winchester and a bandolier of ammunition. Taking a deep breath, she positioned herself at the window and took aim at the nearest rider, remembering Ethan's instructions. Front sight, not the target. Breathe out as you squeeze. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as she fired, but her aim was true. The man tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain. Tom gave her a startled look through the window, then nodded in grim approval before turning back to face the attackers. "Get the girl!" she heard Bill Clayton shout. "Burn the rest!" The skirmish lasted only minutes, but to Sarah, it felt like hours. She fired again and again, forcing the attackers to seek cover. When one tried to circle around to the back of the house, she was waiting, the derringer steady in her hand. She fired both shots, hitting him in the shoulder. By the time Ethan and the others returned, the Clayton gang was retreating, leaving 2 wounded men behind. Ethan burst through the door, panic on his face for the first time since Sarah had met him. "Sarah!" he called, forgetting formality in his fear. "I'm here," she answered, stepping out from the kitchen with the Winchester still in her hands. Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by concern as he saw the blood on her dress. "Are you hurt?" "No, it's Hank's blood. I was helping him." Ethan nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "You did well," he said, glancing at the rifle. "Very well." It wasn't until that night, alone in her room, that Sarah realized he had called her by her first name, and that stranger still, she hadn't minded at all. A week later, Sarah stumbled upon a locked room on the second floor. Curiosity got the better of her, and she found a spare key in Ethan's desk. The room was a shrine to someone long gone. A woman's dresses hung in the wardrobe, jewelry lay on the dressing table, and a portrait on the wall showed a beautiful young woman with sad eyes. Martha Blackwood, according to the small plaque on the frame. She was 19 when we married. Sarah whirled around to find Ethan standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I shouldn't have—" "It's all right." He stepped into the room, his eyes on the portrait. "You would have wondered eventually what happened to her." Ethan was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. "Her father owned the largest cattle operation in Wyoming. My marrying her was meant to join our lands. Like the royal marriages of old Europe, business, not love." He touched a silk shawl draped over a chair. "She never wanted it, never wanted me. But her father insisted, and mine agreed." He turned to Sarah, and for the first time she saw raw emotion in his eyes. "I gave her everything I thought she needed. This house, fine clothes, security. But I never asked what she wanted. Never thought to." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "After our second winter here, I rode to town for supplies. 3 days. When I came back, I found her in the snow behind the barn. She'd taken laudanum, the whole bottle." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. I buried her myself. Dug the grave with these hands." He held them up as if seeing the dirt still there. "I swore then I'd never marry again, not unless the woman walked in freely and could walk out the same way." They stood in silence, the weight of his confession hanging between them. "Is that why you helped me at the saloon?" Sarah asked softly. "Because of her?" Ethan met her gaze. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do, because no person should be bartered like cattle." He took a step closer. "But yes, when I saw you standing there, with fire in your eyes, even as your father tried to sell you off, I saw something I recognized." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the front door downstairs. "Mr. Blackwood?" called one of the ranch hands. "Ryder coming in, says he's got a letter from Miss Mitchell." The letter was from Sarah's younger sister, Emma. It was brief and desperate. "Sarah, Father's drinking worse than ever. Says he's going to give me to that whiskey trader from Helena. Says the man will pay in 2 barrels and a new wagon. Please, Sarah, do something. Love. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the words. Emma was just 16, still a child. Without thinking, she ran from the house to the stables, where Ethan was checking a horse's hoof. Ethan, she gasped, clutching the letter. He's selling her. He's giving Emma away for 2 barrels of whiskey and a damn wagon. Ethan straightened, concern etched on his face. Your father? She nodded, fighting back tears. Please, I know you don't owe me anything, but I can't let him do this. I can't let her live what we... He stepped forward, not touching her, but standing close. Do you believe, he asked quietly, that I would ever turn away someone in need? She looked up, vulnerability raw in her eyes. I don't know what to believe anymore. Ethan looked away for a moment, then reached for his coat. Saddle your horse. We leave in 10 minutes. They rode hard, reaching town by midday. Word had already spread through Rattlesnake Gulch. Frank Mitchell was trading his youngest daughter for liquor and a wagon. The townsfolk stared as Ethan and Sarah rode up the main street, followed by 2 trusted ranch hands. Frank was outside the saloon, laughing with a heavy-set man with a cigar, the whiskey trader from Helena. Sarah dismounted before Ethan could stop her. You will not touch her, she shouted. She's a child, Father. Frank turned, blinking in surprise. Well, well, look what the wind blew back. His eyes narrowed. You got no say in this girl. She's my daughter. She is not yours to sell. Sarah's voice carried down the street, drawing more onlookers. I fed her, clothed her, raised her, Frank spat. I can do what I please with what's mine. Ethan dismounted and stepped between them. The crowd began to gather, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Emma Mitchell is not livestock, Ethan said, his voice like gravel and thunder. She's a girl, a sister, and she will not be bartered. The whiskey trader shifted uncomfortably, sensing trouble. Frank sneered. And what are you then? A savior? Don't forget, Blackwood, you paid for her sister with cash money. What makes you any different? Sarah froze. Ethan did not flinch. I bought her time to choose, he said, and I waited for her to choose me. That's the difference. A long silence followed. The whiskey trader cleared his throat. Look, Mitchell, I don't want no trouble with Blackwood. Deal's off. He backed away, leaving Frank alone to face Ethan and Sarah. Frank's face turned a dangerous red. You ungrateful little... His hand moved to his belt. But before he could draw his gun, Sarah had the derringer out and pointed at his chest. Don't, she said, her voice steady. Don't make me do this, Father. For a tense moment, it seemed Frank might push his luck. But something in Sarah's eyes, a newfound strength, a willingness to do what was necessary, made him reconsider. Damn you both, he muttered, then staggered back into the saloon. Ethan turned to Sarah. You all right? She nodded, holstering the small pistol. Then, for the first time since they'd met, she reached out and touched his arm. Thank you, she whispered. Around them, something shifted in the eyes of the townspeople. They began to see Ethan Blackwood not as the man who'd bought a bride, but as the man who'd given a woman back her voice. They found Emma hiding in the back room of the general store. The girl flew into Sarah's arms, sobbing with relief. It's all right now, Sarah soothed, stroking her sister's hair. You're coming with us. You're safe. But as they prepared to leave town, trouble arrived in the form of the Clayton brothers. Bill Clayton blocked their path, flanked by 3 armed men. Leaving so soon, Blackwood? He drawled. Without saying goodbye? Ethan's hand hovered near his holster. Stand aside, Clayton. We've got no quarrel with you today. Oh, but I've got one with you, Bill replied. You cost me 2 men last week. Good men. They chose their path, Ethan said evenly. just as you're choosing yours now? The tension in the street was palpable. Townsfolk ducked into doorways anticipating gunfire. I'm tired of dancing around at Blackwood, Bill said. I want that land of yours, the water rights especially, and I aim to have them. That's not going to happen. Bill's smile was cold. Then I guess we do this the hard way. What happened next was a blur. Bill went for his gun, but Ethan was faster. Years of practice making the difference between life and death. 3 shots cracked through the air. The first caught Bill's accomplice in the chest. The second shattered the whiskey bottle behind the bar. The third struck the mirror, sending glass shards flying. When the smoke cleared, Bill Clayton lay clutching his shoulder, cursing through clenched teeth. His remaining men either lay wounded or had fled. Ethan holstered his smoking Colt and turned to Sarah and Emma, who had taken cover behind the water trough. Time to go home, he said, his voice betraying no emotion, but his eyes seeking Sarah's confirmation. She nodded, helping Emma to her feet. Yes, home. But while they were in town, Ray Clayton and the remaining gang members had seized their opportunity. They attacked Blackwood Ranch in force, overwhelming the few hands left behind. By the time Ethan, Sarah, and the others returned, the ranch house was ablaze, and the cattle were scattered. The Clayton gang had positioned themselves around the property, waiting to ambush the returning riders. The first shots came as they crested the hill overlooking the ranch. Ethan's horse went down, and he rolled clear just as bullets kicked up dirt around him. Sarah and Emma took cover behind rocks, while the ranch hands returned fire from whatever shelter they could find. Stay down, Ethan shouted to Sarah, working his way from boulder to boulder, firing with deadly precision at their attackers. Ray Clayton's voice carried across the valley. Give it up, Blackwood. This land is mine now. Come and take it, Ethan called back, chambering another round. The firefight was brutal and swift. Ethan took a bullet to the thigh but kept fighting. Sarah, seeing him wounded and surrounded, made a desperate move. She circled behind a ridge and came up behind Ray Clayton with the Derringer. Drop your gun, she ordered, pressing the barrel against his back. Clayton froze, then slowly raised his hands. Well, the little filly's got teeth. And I'll use them if you don't tell your men to stand down. Clayton hesitated, then called out, Boys, hold your fire. One by one, the gunshots ceased. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Now tell them to drop their weapons and ride out, she demanded. You heard the lady, Clayton said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Drop 'em and mount up. Slowly, reluctantly, the remaining gang members complied. This ain't over, Clayton muttered as his men retreated. Yes, it is, Sarah replied, because if you ever come near this ranch again, I won't aim for your shoulder. She stepped back, keeping the Derringer trained on him. Now get out. When they were gone, she ran to where Ethan lay propped against a rock, his leg bleeding heavily. Ethan, she cried, kneeling beside him. How bad is it? I've had worse, he grimaced, though his face was pale with blood loss. You did good, Sarah. Real good. She tore a strip from her petticoat to bind his wound. Don't you dare die on me, Ethan Blackwood. Not now. A faint smile touched his lips. Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am. Ethan's recovery was slow but steady. Though the main house suffered severe damage from the fire, the bunkhouse and barn remained intact. For a week, he drifted in and out of consciousness, battling infection and blood loss. Sarah never left his side, bathing his forehead with cool cloths, forcing broth between his cracked lips. Emma helped where she could, and the ranch hands worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been destroyed. In his delirium, Ethan spoke of things long buried: the war, his wife, his fears of dying alone. And sometimes he spoke of Sarah. Should have told you, he murmured once, gripping her hand in the darkness. Should have said the words. What words, Ethan? She whispered, but he had already slipped back into restless sleep. By the 8th day, the fever broke. Sarah, exhausted from her vigil, had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed. She awoke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You're still here," he said softly. "Where else would I be?" He reached for her hand. "You could have gone, taken Emma and left. Is that what you want?" "No," he said simply, "but it's what you deserve. The choice." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I've made my choice." 2 weeks later, when Ethan could walk with the aid of a cane, he asked Sarah to ride with him. They took a trail leading up to the ridge overlooking the valley, moving at a gentle pace to accommodate his healing leg. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they reached the top of the hill. From there, they could see for miles the rolling hills, the distant mountains. The ribbon of green that marked the diverted creek running through Blackwood Ranch. Ethan dismounted carefully, then helped Sarah down. He pointed to where the trail forked ahead. "That trail to the left leads back to the ranch," he said, his voice gruff with emotion he rarely displayed. "It's familiar, safe, mine." He gestured toward the right. "That one goes straight into the next county. You could reach the stage stop by sundown if you ride steady. From there, Denver's 3 days by coach." Sarah frowned, confused. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I meant what I said, Sarah. I don't want you to stay because you feel indebted or because you have nowhere else to go." His eyes met hers. "I want you to stay if it's something you choose." Her heart hammered in her chest. "You brought me all the way up here just to let me go." "I did." He took a few steps back, turning his gaze to the horizon. "I won't follow. Whichever path you take, you'll ride it alone." The wind picked up, tugging at Sarah's hair. Freedom, true freedom, was right there for the taking. The open road, a new beginning, no one to answer to but herself. But then she looked at the man standing before her, a man who had offered her silence instead of commands, space instead of chains, choice instead of subjugation, a man who had waited patiently for her to decide. Sarah gathered her reins and turned her horse toward the left path, toward home. Ethan heard the horse moving and turned, just enough to meet her eyes. She said nothing. He said nothing in return. But something passed between them, a quiet understanding, a thread beginning to weave. They rode back in silence, but the space between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a beginning. By early autumn, a new cabin stood on Blackwood Ranch, nestled between two hills near the creek. It was smaller than the main house, but brighter, with wide windows and a wraparound porch. "I still can't believe you built it exactly as I sketched," Sarah said, standing barefoot on the new porch steps. Ethan smiled, something he did more freely these days. "Wasn't much of a leap. You wanted light, space, and a door that opens only from the inside. Every woman deserves that much." The floor plan had been Sarah's, drawn during Ethan's recovery. Every corner and beam, every window and cupboard, a place not given, but created, a home not inherited, but earned. That morning they planted a rose bush beneath the porch window, its roots tangled with soil warmed by the autumn sun. Ethan knelt, his hands in the dirt, while Sarah gently placed the small shrub into the hole. Pink blossoms curled at the edges, preparing for winter sleep. "Why roses?" he asked. "They fight," she answered. "They bloom despite their thorns. Just like you. Just like me." He nodded as if that explained everything. Emma emerged from the cabin, a letter in her hand. "It's from the school in Helena," she announced excitedly. "They've accepted me for the spring term." Sarah hugged her sister tightly. After the confrontation with their father, they'd applied for Emma to attend the girls' school in the capital. With Ethan's recommendation and financial backing, she'd been accepted. "I want to be a teacher," Emma said, her eyes shining with possibilities that had seemed impossible just months ago. Like those women in your books, Sarah. But mostly, I want to be like you. Later, as the sun set over the valley, Sarah and Ethan sat on the porch of the new cabin. His leg was healing well. Soon he wouldn't need the cane at all. I received a letter from the bank today, he said. Your father's debt is officially settled. Sarah nodded, understanding the significance. So I'm free to go. You've always been free to go, Ethan replied. But yes, there's nothing binding you here now. She turned to face him. Except choice. His eyes, normally so guarded, were open now, vulnerable, hopeful. Sarah, she placed a finger against his lips. Let me say this. Ethan Blackwood. When my father traded me for his debts, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd become just another man's possession. She took his hand in hers. But you gave me something no one else ever has, the right to choose my own path. Sarah stood and pulled Ethan to his feet. In the fading light, with the scent of roses drifting on the evening breeze, she kissed him, soft, certain, free. I choose you, she whispered against his lips. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Under the vast Montana sky, they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, not as owner and possession, but as equals who had chosen each other. A month later, the town of Rattlesnake Gulch witnessed something remarkable. A wedding born not of obligation or business, but of choice. The church was packed, ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers, all curious to see the union of Ethan Blackwood and Sarah Mitchell. Sarah wore no veil, just a simple dress and wildflowers in her hair. Ethan wore the same black coat as always, but his face was different, open, alive with a joy few had ever seen him display. When it came time for her vows, Sarah turned to Ethan and took both his hands in hers. I used to think I was just something passed between men, she said, her voice clear and strong. A weight, a burden, a trade. She looked into his eyes. But then you stood still and waited. You let me choose. She took a deep breath. From this day on, I am no longer the girl who was given away. She smiled, radiant with certainty. I am the woman who chose you. The small church erupted in applause. Even the hardened cowboys removed their hats in respect. Outside, under a sky the color of hope, they walked back to their new home together. And in the soil by the porch, the rose bush stood strong against the autumn wind, preparing to bloom when spring returned. And so, in a land carved by wind and hardship, where women were often silenced and love was rarely free, Sarah Mitchell chose not just a man, but her own future. From a bartered bride to a woman who charted her own course, she became more than just someone's wife. She became the author of her own story. As they reached the cabin, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching slowly. The man wore a dusty hat and a tin star on his chest, a U.S. Marshal from the territorial capital. Ethan Blackwood? The man called as he drew near. We need to talk about Bill Clayton. Seems he had some outstanding warrants in Wyoming, and I hear you might know where to find him. Ethan and Sarah exchanged glances. Their story, it seemed, was not quite finished. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Tales. We share unforgettable romances from the American frontier, where love defied the rules and courage wrote its own ending. Tap the bell icon to never miss a tale of passion, grit, and redemption in the Wild West, where bullets might miss, but hearts never do.